$2,500. Do you know how much it costs to keep families in the detention centers?
I don't.
Well, one report said that 2019 congressional budget justification estimated the cost of family detention beds to be $318, almost $320 per day per family. By contrast, the Family Case Management Program, which the Trump administration terminated in July 2017, was about $38 per day. And I believe that you said that you did not think that alternatives to family detention would work. Can you tell me on what basis and what justification you have for that conclusion?
So I would defer to the ICE testimony, including by Deputy Director Albans at this committee in July, where he discussed alternatives to detention, including the Family Case Management Program. From my perspective, from a border security perspective, when we apprehend families and they're either not detained at all, which is the majority now, or they're detained for just a short period of time and aren't kept together through the entirety of their immigration proceedings, it creates an incentive for other families to cross. And that's what we're seeing today at our border.
Well, I'd be very interested to know how many families, how long of the, I don't know, some 2,500 or so who are in family detention centers, how long they stay there, and whether alternatives would work, because there's evidence that these much more cost-effective alternatives do work.
Senator Harris.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner, there's been a lot of talk about the use of tear gas in November, and my question is, there have been public reports, I believe it was from Patrol Chief Agent Rodney Scott and then you today, that you are conducting an internal affairs investigation. Is that correct?
It's called the use of force review. It is aided by our Office of Professional Responsibility. It's not an internal affairs investigation with an assumption of misconduct, though.
Okay, but you are investigating what happened.
All of our uses of force are reviewed.
Okay, and so to be clear, you've said in your testimony today that you will approach it and in the findings with transparency. So specifically, will you commit to making all of your findings public and available to this committee?
We have a process after a use of force review board is complete about publishing findings from the use of force review board, whether there's tactics, training, procedures that have been identified for improvement. And yes, I'll share that with the committee.
Okay. And were your agents wearing body-worn cameras during this incident? I know that Chief Agent Scott has mentioned that there's a lot of video from the incident.
Yes, obviously there was a lot of cameras out there. Both, open source media has a number of videos mostly from the south side. We do have imagery from our fixed cameras on the border, some from air assets. We're packaging all that together.
About body-worn cameras?
Very dynamic. No, we actually did not have body-worn cameras deployed with these agents, but we're actually the first federal agency to pilot the use of body-worn cameras. We're expanding that now into operational deployments.
And I want to commend you for that, because I know that you conducted a feasibility study in 2015. You found that CBP could benefit from body-worn cameras, and I commend you for your leadership on that, and I agree with your reasons. Also, can you please then, as a follow-up to that point, commit to providing us with a written update on your progress in implementing the body-worn cameras pilot?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. As you have acknowledged, and there's been discussion, again, regarding the November 25th incident at the San Ysidro Port of Entry. You know, and there's been discussion this morning, that that port sees 73 million border crossings a year, and it's at the heart of over $250 billion of annual gross regional product from San Diego and Imperial counties and neighboring Baja California. So my question is, I appreciate the security concerns that you've expressed and that existed at that time. But what I want to understand is, why did the closure require up to 5 hours of closure? Why that long? And given your agency's mission, and in particular to also facilitate legal trade and commerce, how did you weigh the harmful effects on commerce?
Sure.
Against your concerns about security?
Very important question, Senator. I could not agree more. It's an economic engine for that region of California and more broadly around the country. I personally wrote into our operational plan the need to maximize legitimate trade and travel while we made sure that any caravan arrival would be managed in a safe way. So I delegated that authority to the lead field coordinator in San Diego area. He made that decision based on what was presented to him in terms of intelligence from our Mexican counterparts, imagery we had about large groups still very active in the region for that full 5 hours. They actually opened it up a little bit before they felt that we had full resolution because they thought it was a secure enough situation, and they worked very hard to catch up on the traffic backlogs.
And the process by which that decision was made for it to be closed for that length of time, is that part of your review of the incident?
Absolutely. It has to be documented, the reasons for it, and the length of it.
And you can appreciate that there's a lot of concern in that part of our state from business owners, especially when the president has threatened to, quote, permanently close the border, that there would be real economic harm to that region. And so as a follow-up to that point, have you met with the San Diego area elected officials and the Chamber of Commerce leaders to get feedback from them of their assessment of the economic impact of these policies? And if not, will you commit to doing so?
I will, and I did speak with Mayor Falconer after this incident, and we're in touch almost daily with Sandag and the local Chamber of Commerce through our Director of Field Operations. Very concerned about the impact, and we'll definitely continue that dialogue.
Okay, and provide us with any documentation in terms of your analysis of what happened in looking in the rearview mirror, but also what improvements can be made to protocols and policy going forward and training. Shifting the topic, the president on November 27 declared that, quote, you have a lot of people that grab children at the border, suggesting that there are a lot of people who falsely pose as asylum-seeking families in an attempt to enter the country. Secretary Nielsen also told Congress that DHS was separating families to protect children from trafficking. You have stated that the CBP has identified 600, quote, fraudulent families in the past year. So my question is, how many of these cases has CBP referred for criminal prosecution, especially since Secretary Nielsen has repeatedly declared, quote, our policy is if you break the law, we will prosecute you? Because I have asked your agency for data on how many individuals have been referred for prosecution of trafficking, and I'm told you're not collecting that data, which seems inconsistent with a statement that this is a priority, that there will be a criminal prosecution if people violate and break the law, especially, I would think, our trafficking laws. So I'm attempting to reconcile a priority that apparently is the basis for separating children from what might be their parents. Absolutely, I appreciate that. So can you explain why you're not collecting this data and how it is that we can determine if trafficking is actually happening if there's no criminal referral for prosecution?
So we are tracking our criminal referrals carefully, and we can certainly designate that with the folks that have been part of a fraudulent family unit. So we'll share that with the committee as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. Great to have you in front of us again. And I thought your lengthy submitted testimony, 15 pages, covered a very wide range of important and interesting issues. I'd love to follow up with you, for example, on trademark enforcement, counterfeiting enforcement, something that Chairman and I have a caucus on, and commend you on the work in automated commercial environment, ACE. But I'm struck, given the number of questions and the length of exchange with you about President Trump's insistence on funding and building a border wall, that in the 15 pages of testimony, you dedicate just one sentence to border infrastructure. Could you help me understand why President Trump's threatening to shut down the government of the United States when in an oversight hearing on the whole scope and reach of CBP's important responsibilities, you dedicate just one sentence to building physical barriers between our country and others?
I think I had a few more sentences in my oral testimony, and I knew it would be a topic of conversation during the dialogue at the hearing. So it is a critical tool for us. It's already making an impact. The miles we've built in El Centro and El Paso with the FY17 funding have dramatically reduced traffic in those areas, over 70% in El Centro, over 35% in those areas of El Paso. It's a really important tool.
And to be clear about the testimony you've already given to a number of other members, you don't support and aren't advancing the idea of building a single concrete wall dividing the United States and Mexico, but rather a series of tactical systems that combine surveillance, monitoring, fencing, and wall systems. That's really what you've been advocating today. Is that correct?
Correct. That's what our Border Patrol agents in the field have asked for and need.
Well, it's my hope, I've supported investment in border security, but I think there's a significant disconnect between what the president has been advocating for and what I think has been your more nuanced testimony here today. Let me move on. The administration's travel ban that targeted predominantly Muslim-majority countries was something I strongly oppose, and I don't believe it makes us safer. I want to ask you about one provision of the travel ban proclamation, which says that CBP or consular officials can waive the entry restrictions on a case-by-case basis. How many waivers have been granted by CBP officials?
I'd have to get back to you on that, Senator. I don't have that with me today.
Do you know how many requests for waivers CBP has received?
I don't know that.
Could you provide a country-by-country breakdown and the reasons for granting or denying the waivers when you get back to me, please?
Yes.
I would appreciate that, Commissioner, because frankly, a reading of the Supreme Court's decision upholding the travel ban clearly relied on there being a real waiver process. And my concern is that that process either doesn't exist or isn't effectively working. So please follow up with me in writing. I would appreciate that.
Will do.
And just to be clear, are individuals apprehended between ports of entry still being given the opportunity to seek asylum as the law requires?
Yes.
Thank you. Let me move to a last topic, if I could. Two things. The USA Act, which I introduced with Senator McCain in February, would have required a strategy for addressing root causes of illegal immigration from Central America to the United States, something championed by my predecessor, the former Vice President. Unfortunately, this administration continues to slash aid to those countries in its annual budget proposals. Would you agree that helping to improve stability, rule of law, safety conditions in the three core countries in Central America is a necessary component of border security?
I think working on the root causes and the push factors is absolutely essential. It's one of the key elements of an effective integrated strategy. We've got partners that we need to support in Central America, and I'm personally doing that with CBP's capabilities on a customs-to-customs basis, on a law enforcement and security basis, and also trying to support efforts of partners at USAID and elsewhere who are really trying to target their efforts at the key push factors for migration from the region.
Do you have any idea if the 2020 budget proposal will reflect the importance and significance of that ongoing and close partnership?
So the formation of that budget is not part of my responsibilities, but it's certainly a key element of an overall strategy.
I'll just say I'm struck that I agree. I think that is a critical part of a sustained key strategy. But it has to be sustained, and sustained at a significant level. And yet the last 2 years' budget proposals slashed that aid significantly. I think we're heading in the wrong direction. I commend you for your attention to that relationship. Let me last ask about the family separation policy. I'm glad it's been rescinded. I thought it was cruel to separate parents from children at the border, but I remain concerned about their treatment. When an unaccompanied child arrives at the border, one of the first questions a U.S. official asks is whether that child has a family member in the U.S. who could care for them. My impression is that CBP is sharing that information with ICE, and as we've seen, unaccompanied children spend more time in the care of our government or the custody of our government before they're released to sponsors. I have concern about how that information is being used. Can you guarantee information CBP obtains from these children to identify caretakers is not then being used to arrest and deport their relatives?
Give us a brief answer, Mr. Commissioner.
So what I can guarantee is that information we collect is available to our partners at ICE and HHS OR&R, which has the care and custody of children after that immediate period that they're at the border. I know that they're very committed to finding the right sponsor to place a child with.
Well, I'll just close by saying in September, a senior ICE official, Matthew Albence, told Congress more than 40 people who came forward as sponsors were arrested for having done so. And I'd be interested if you'd follow up in writing about in how many of those arrested it stemmed from information CBP obtained from unaccompanied children. There's so much more I wish we could talk about in this oversight hearing about the broad and important work that you and CBP do, but these are divisive foundational values issues. Thank you for your service, Commissioner.
The distinguished senator from Rhode Island.
Well, I thank the distinguished chairman from Louisiana.
You're quite welcome.
We coastal folk have to stick together.
Just a couple of distinguished guys.
Hey, first of all, Commissioner, thank you for coming in. I wanted to follow up a little bit with some of Senator Durbin's questions on fentanyl. What more can we be doing? This is such a scourge, and so much press attention and so much parent and management attention goes to border wall issues. I think a lot more Americans are dying because fentanyl's coming through our Customs and Border Protection system than because of people coming over our borders. So what more can we do to be helpful to you? You speak very generally about a few projects to try to improve mail surveillance in your testimony, but it seems like we're a long way from being close to an adequate surveillance and adequate intervention.
Yeah, I think there were some important developments in the last few weeks on this issue as well. It's been a priority administration-wide. You know, the president has a personal commitment to addressing fentanyl. I've seen that demonstrated. He engaged the Chinese president on scheduling fentanyl as a controlled substance, which really the Chinese government effort is going to be essential to addressing this, because so much of the production right now is in China, much of it illicit now, and so I think
I know you don't want to talk about ongoing investigations and prosecutions. I've been a United States attorney and I understand that. But can you at least reassure me that there is a flow of cases being prepared for presentation to United States attorneys so that Chinese individuals who are responsible for shipping fentanyl into the United States are indicted under U.S. law? And can you give me some sense of how wide that thread of cases is? Is there like one out there, or is this really a serious effort, and can we look forward in the future to continued indictments of those responsible for firing fentanyl into our country?
I think it's a really serious effort, and especially given the vector in the mail facility that Senator Durbin started the dialogue on, getting the advanced electronic data allows us to bring in our investigative partners right away, HSI, U.S. Postal Inspection Service, not only to go after the network receiving that fentanyl and putting it in pill presses, but also in who's sending it, what are the companies on the side of China who are responsible for this, and how do we go after them?
Whatever order of magnitude you are comfortable, let's say to the nearest 20 or 50 cases, how many criminal cases do you think are in process focusing on the Chinese fentanyl delivery system?
I fear that my visibility would limit the overall federal government effort with HSI, DEA, the HIDAs out there around the country, all working this issue and very focused on it. I'm personally aware of a couple dozen cases. Okay,
that are coming out of CBP.
A lot of them generated by CBP seizures that are then being expanded to address the network, yes.
Okay. Back to the wall for a minute. We've heard repeated reports in the news about Customs and Border Patrol agents saying that we want a fence, quote, fence that we can look through. That's what we need. Another one, you never want to have a barrier in place that will obstruct your vision. That seems like a pretty sensible, tactical concern for our folks to have along the border. It also seems inconsistent with a big masonry wall is the ability to see through and have situational awareness and visibility to the other side. Part of the reason that you're supporting this network of obstacles and surveillance devices rather than a C-to-C concrete solid barrier.
Yeah, it's an officer and agent safety issue to be able to have a transparent barrier so you can see threats from the other side. The President and the administration have supported the barrier that our agents are asking for that does include that capability.
And I don't know that we've got a plan yet from anybody for what is being asked for. We're being asked here in Congress to put a lot of money behind a, quote, border wall. I'm not accustomed to giving a contractor money for a project before I've seen the plan. You know, you roll it out and you look and you see it's going to go here, it's going to go there, it's going to be this high, it's going to require this much land to be condemned. Is there such a plan that you have seen for a solid border wall that actually is a real plan that a contractor could use to build off of?
So we have a plan, absolutely, a 33-segment, priority segment plan for building wall. The way we do our contracts through the Army Corps of Engineers, it's a multiple award task order contract where they compete it with American companies each time for each segment, and then it's 100% design build. So we specify the requirements, the contractors in the Army Corps come in and do the design.
So there's no place right now that a center could go and say, roll out the paper and plan for the wall from place to place? You'd have to grab different sections in which walls are being proposed. Is that what I understand?
Actually, briefly, Mr. Commissioner.
Okay, we can give the overall plan, and we can give segment by segment. For the plans under contract, we can show how it's being built and the exact design.
Okay.
In the FY18 funded.
I would like to
RGB,
see that, because I think there's a lot of concern that depending on how we build this, an enormous amount of private property could be taken from American citizens, from ranches and so forth, that it could interfere with the access of livestock to reach water, that could interfere with cutting off various facilities on the other side of the wall because you can't wall around an oxbow, for instance. There are a whole variety of concerns, and I'd like to follow up to figure out how we can see that.
Duly noted. Senator Cruz is on his way. In the meantime, I'll start a second round for anybody that wants to ask questions. I've seen, I think, the plans you're talking about, Mr. Commissioner. Why does this wall slash fence slash barrier cost $25 million a mile?
It doesn't. It costs different amounts depending on the type of terrain that we're working in.
What's the average cost?
The average cost is a lot lower than that. I'll get that to you with precision now that we have a number of contracts underway.
Well, give me a ballpark. Surely you know an answer.
It's anywhere from 5 to 25 million, depending on the area of border that we're talking about.
Well, you drive on the interstate, don't you?
Indeed.
Have you ever seen those walls alongside the interstate?
Yes.
How long's how many miles of road, barriers, fences, walls are you planning on building?
We talked about, and this is a combination of primary barrier right on the border, some secondary barrier.
Right.
In a place like the Rio Grande Valley, we've got to contend with
how many?
The floodplain. About 1,100 miles total. Okay. We talked about.
Well, we built 2,700 miles of interstate barriers, walls, not fences, walls, for $4 billion. Now, I understand these barriers are different, but we spent $1.5 million a mile for the interstate, and they probably could have done it for less than that. So how come I mean, and I understand you've got to have some technology and sensors and all that stuff. But $25 million a mile?
So, Senator, there's a number of different factors. We are costing out, we want to present to Congress an accurate depiction of how much it's going to cost for this barrier. It's not just the physical barrier itself. It's the property acquisition. It's the access roads to get to the wall.
We had property acquisition for the interstate, too.
And maybe you calculated that in the cost that you just offered on the interstate wall creation. But we have a fully loaded cost that includes all of those different elements, including the sensors and cameras. I would respectfully offer, and certainly we can get an expert briefing for you, Senator, or for your team, that this is a different type of engineering project than a domestic interstate.
I understand that. I just want to understand why it's, 10, 15, 20 times different. I just think you can sharpen your pencil and reduce the cost here and make this money stretch further.
We've had a number of segments so far come in under cost on contract due to the competitive bidding process that we worked through the Army Corps of Engineers to put in place.
Why don't we do something intelligent and try to change some money here, save some money here?
We will absolutely continue to drive cost savings throughout the management of this program.
Before I call on Senator Cruz, has the wall in San Diego worked?
Absolutely.
Has it worked in Yuma?
Yes.
Has it worked in El Paso?
It's worked everywhere we've put barrier in, Senator.
Do walls work?
Yes.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, welcome.
Good to see you.
Thank you for your service, and let me say thank you to the men and women of CBP. I've been proud to spend a great deal of time with. The men and women you lead have an incredibly difficult job, an incredibly important job. They risk their lives on a daily basis, and let me say thank you for the important service you and the men and women you lead provide.
Thank you.
As you know, first 6 months of the Trump administration, we saw illegal crossings plummet. We saw apprehensions at the border plummet. And then since then, we've seen the numbers steadily increasing. To what do you ascribe that increase in illegal crossings?
The main factor, especially given the demographic changes we're seeing. Last month, we had over 59% of crossings were either families or unaccompanied children. They're predominantly coming from Central America now, almost 70% in November, and all of these trends are just steepening at this point. We attribute that to the understanding, the smugglers advertising it, and the migrants understanding that they come as a family, or if they claim fear of return, they'll likely be allowed to stay indefinitely in the United States.
So can you put some specifics on the numbers? What increase have we seen in family units crossing illegally?
So in June, well, actually, if you want to go back to April or March of the 17, when we saw that huge decrease, we had fewer than 10,000 people overall. And very small numbers of families coming in. For instance, family units in April of FY17 were 2,116. Last month was 30,154. So to put a specific fine point on it,
30,000 family units or 30,000 people in family units?
30,000 people in family units. That's how we count them.
How about unaccompanied minors? What have we seen on the numbers there?
So unaccompanied minors have been more stable, but have also gone up. We're seeing about 5,000 a month right now.
To what extent are y'all encountering either family units or unaccompanied minors who've been in the custody of human trafficking?
Almost exclusively. Human smuggling, we would refer to it.
And to what extent are you saying that these kids are being subjected to either physical abuse or sexual abuse in the process of being smuggled into the country?
A harrowing percentage, Senator, are being affected by sexual violence or other abuse in the process of their journey. Doctors Without Borders, independent, obviously humanitarian concern. They operate over a dozen clinics in Mexico. They've stated that 68% of the people they interact with have been victims of violence on the journey. 38% of women and girls sexually assaulted. So the figures are devastating, and it's not just U.S. government data. It's NGOs who are working with these populations to try to keep them safe.
So do you share my assessment that nobody concerned with compassion or humanity should want to see any little boys or any little girls in the custody of human traffickers or human smugglers?
Yeah, what's happening to some of the most vulnerable people in our hemisphere on this journey is deplorable, and we need to work with Mexico to address these TCOs. We need to work with Central America to address the push factors, and we've got to decrease the incentive in our legal system to invite these people into this dangerous cycle.
To what extent has the Flores settlement proven an impediment to dealing with this problem?
Well, in 2014, when we saw the first family surge, then Secretary of Homeland Security Jay Johnson was able to detain families together through an immigration proceeding and start removing them once we saw the stark trend. That created a huge deterrent. Immediately, the numbers dropped of family units crossing. In 2015, a district court in California ruled that unaccompanied children, even if they have a parent with them, could not be kept in federal custody more than 20 days. That's not long enough for an immigration proceeding with due process, which is our commitment. So as a result, we've seen family unit numbers climb really unabated, but for the inauguration of President Trump in January 17. But as soon as the migrants and smugglers realized the laws hadn't fundamentally changed, we saw the families start to increase again to this level of 30,000 last month.
What additional tools does CBP need to be able to effectively secure the border?
So we have a border security improvement plan that we've submitted to Congress. We're in the process of updating that. Border wall system is a fundamental capability for impedance and denial. We need more technology. We need better sensors for our air and marine operations. And of course, we need agents and officers. Also, we need technology at the ports of entry to address the counter-narcotics efforts that we're trying to undertake there and get more vehicles and trucks through that screening as they enter Texas, as they enter the stream of commerce in the United States. So really we need that all four things in an integrated strategy.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Fanson, do you have additional questions?
I do, if I might. It's my understanding, I've been trying to read the OIG report, and It's my understanding that in September, the DHS IG found that hundreds of separated children were detained by Border Patrol for longer than 72 hours. My staff has visited the El Centro Border Patrol station in Imperial and found children sleeping on floors without access to water and basic hygiene products. So the question is, what steps are being taken to be sure that these kinds of situations are cleaned up and not permitted to continue?
First, Senator, there's no area of our operations that's more aggressively managed than the care of children in our care and custody and their transfer as soon as possible to Health and Human Services. I get a twice daily report on the number of children in our custody, how long they've been there. I've assigned my chief operating officer to work on a daily basis with Health and Human Services to ensure that they're able to grant placement for any children in our custody as expeditiously as possible. And I mentioned in my opening statement the mismatch
you're not
between
saying that this didn't happen, that my staff didn't see this.
No, I've talked about the fact that our stations were designed for the custody of adults, adults usually who had just committed a criminal violation.
What this says is it questions whether that's working or not.
Well, we're working as hard as we can to take care of the children in our custody and transfer them expeditiously. If you go to a Border Patrol station or a port of entry today, you'll see, next to areas where we're designed to process single adults, you'll see diapers and baby formula and children's food. Right now at Paso del Norte in El Paso port of entry, you will see kids in the officer break room watching a movie and being cared for by officers. This is not a system that was designed for the arrival of kids and families in the numbers we're seeing. We've worked with Congress to request additional support for child medical care, child mental health and welfare for those arriving, even in that short period of time that we're interacting with these children. It's a critical area that we need to continue to improve.
Well, for just a minute, what would you improve first and by how much?
So the first thing I would do, and the thing I'm most worried about, and we talked about in our last meeting a bit, is the fact that under the very important TVPRA, which sets standards for treatment of children, I know you were instrumental in authoring that legislation, Senator, the ability to repatriate kids from contiguous countries, Mexico and Canada, is there, and we don't see really any flow of UACs that is unmanageable from Mexico. From Central America, however, we're not able to do that repatriation, even working with Central American governments who believe that they have an interest in those children that are arriving unaccompanied. We really need to change that so they don't put themselves in the hands of smugglers. Their parents don't pay smugglers to bring them to the U.S. to even enter the cycle in the first place. I think that would be the most effective step we could take. We would have to modify the law, Senator.
And in what way would we have to modify it?
Well, I believe you could modify it to apply the same standards for repatriation of unaccompanied children that you apply for Mexico and Canada.
Well, I'm going to take a look at that, and I'd ask if you'd work with us.
Absolutely would, Senator.
Be supportive of that?
Yes. And at the same time, I want to make sure that we have the capability to care for children in our custody with the right medical and mental health professionals, and that we have the partnership with Health and Human Services to expeditiously transfer children to a more appropriate custody situation.
Well, I'm going to take you at your word, and I'd like to create this part of the legislative future, and would like to work with you in so doing. So
thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to wrap this up, but a number of folks have been to the border. I know Chairman Grassley has. He's told me before that he's seen our kids there with beds and food and supplies and care, but I want to kind of cut to the chase here. You and your agents care about children, don't you?
Absolutely.
Aren't you doing the best you can to try to treat them with kindness and with respect?
Our agents and officers are parents themselves. They don't check, as Chief Provost noted in this committee, their humanity at the door when they put their badge on. They absolutely care for those families and kids.
Yeah. You folks are just kind of overwhelmed, aren't you?
The whole system is overwhelmed.
And a lot of it has to do with the number of people seeking asylum.
Correct.
I think it's gone up, what, 100? 5 years ago, 1 in 100 persons sought asylum. Now it's 1 in 10?
Yeah, it's actually even higher than that. Last year, it's 15 to 18%, and 31% of those arriving at ports of entry without documents.
Now, in your experience, are we just having more people who deserve asylum come, or do we have more people trying to gain the system, or do we have both?
I think we have people who might not understand what a meritorious asylum claim is. If you ask the Executive Office of Immigration Review that manages the immigration courts, they'll tell you that folks from the main countries of origin are only getting asylum at the end of the process 10 to 20% of the time.
Okay. Last question. Did President George W. Bush send troops to the border to help with immigration?
Yes, we also had help during the Obama administration from Department of Defense.
President Obama sent them too?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think that's everything we have. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you.
Let's see if anybody has additional questions for the record. I expect many of my colleagues will. The record will remain open for 1 week. Thank you again, Mr. Commissioner, for sharing so much of your time with us today. The hearing's adjourned.
My honor. Thank you.
You're doing it tomorrow too? Yeah.